depending on who you ask, the improvements to the desalination have made it about 20 to 30% more efficient. Some will even say more. During that same period of time, electricity costs, since I was on the CCSD, have increased by almost 100%. So we're not quite keeping up with the increase in these energy costs. And so that's a struggle for us, because having water as inexpensively and as plentiful as we need is to the benefit of everyone in this community. We want to have that. And if people have to pay so much for water that they can't afford the mortgage, then that hurts the people moving into the community and those kinds of things. So for those of us that are here and those that want to move in here, keeping the price of water as low as possible is something we need to do. And that there are potential things within desalinated water that can cause problems. One of them being boron, which is toxic to plant life. So we'd have to be very, very careful if that became an issue for us. And I don't know that we have bench scale information to tell us whether it does or not. Maybe someone else here in the audience has that, but I don't. Canberra's water shortage is seasonal. It's typically a summertime problem, and we have enough water in the winter when it's raining. That excess water in the creek is not just from rainfall, but we learned during the San Simeon earthquake that there's a lot of fracture flow coming out of the bedrock that is also coming into those streams. And some of that is extremely deep fracture flow that's thermal water. So most of the calculations that have occurred in the previous reports of how much water is available in these creeks has not included the bedrock inflow through the fracture system. Reservoirs are the ideal system and very cost effective to manage seasonal shortfalls. And reservoirs are really essential in this area to help us with wildfire management, because helicopters can take water out of those and use it to put it on the fires. So it's a pretty important thing. And for that matter, if you're doing desalination, seawater desalination with this high electricity cost, the best time to run that is at night when the electricity rates are non-peak. And so you can get the best effect out of it. But to do that, you've got to have a reservoir to put that water in, because there's not a lot of people using water at night. So even to be efficient in seawater desalination, you need reservoirs. There have been, in the recent past, and with the current state situation, I don't know if the money's been swept away or not, but there were up to 100% grants available for building things like reverse osmosis plants, as long as it was to do wastewater polishing, wastewater cleaning up the wastewater. Now, you've already seen how inexpensive the wastewater cleanup is compared to seawater desalination, because seawater is so salty, 30,000 parts per million, where the wastewater is only 1,000 parts per million. The difference in reverse osmosis is how much pressure the pump has to put in to force that more saline water through the membranes. Fresh water is essential for life. With approximately 60% of the electricity in California being generated by burning fossil fuels, which has a limited source availability and is really escalating in the price. High energy consumption for seawater desalination of fresh water potentially would result in an unsustainable community. That is to say, the cost of doing seawater desalination would be so great we couldn't afford it anymore. So if you build a bunch of houses because you have water from seawater desalination, and then the energy costs go up to the point where it's too expensive to do it, you've got a bigger problem than you ever had before. So we could lack that essential fresh water that we have to live because of the depletion of the fossil fuels in just a few decades. And I'm not sure that's the best way for us to go. And back in 1997, when I was on the CCSD, I had lunch with a top U.S. Army Corps of engineer from the LA region. He was up here on vacation. It was at the Cavalier, as a matter of fact. And we had a long discussion back then about seawater desalination and other options. And he basically said the only way the Corps of Engineers would support seawater desalination for a community that had other options was that if we were under political pressure to do it. That's the only way. The CCSD, since I was on it, we started paying lobbyists to lobby for seawater desalination for the community. So the CCSD has created that political pressure. Multiple side canyon reservoirs to capture the excess winter runoff for storage and a state grant for wastewater purification are more cost-effective and environmentally acceptable solutions for Cambria's future water supply. And let me tell you why, in a very succinct way, that seawater desal could really backfire on us. The in-stream resources in our creeks, this area is used to train fish and wildlife and fish and game officials on endangered species, threatened and endangered species, because we are so rich in them in this area. And I had a chance to be part of that training. One of the possibilities is that those agencies could say, once this community has seawater desal, is that when you've got a source of water with your seawater desal, we want you to stop pumping out of those creeks because we need that for our endangered species. They could change our allocation. They could petition the state to change our allocation and tell us that we're going to swap our inexpensive water we're pumping out of the creeks for the very expensive water that's made with seawater desal. There are places that don't have faults and landslides that are ideal for reservoirs off the sides of our creeks, not across the blue line streams, and they're big enough. This was rejected as long-term water supply because they weren't big enough. Well, if you look at little ones, they're not going to be big enough. I got to agree with you. But there are big ones available. So we've got 400 to 700 acre feet of water, potentially, that we could be putting into reservoirs to help this community. Another thing the district did for a while, and it stopped, and this was when I was on board, was that we had rainwater collection tanks that people would use to irrigate their own yards, and they catch the water off the roofs. The concept now is called low impact development, and it's the way all California is going for all future development. And we could retrofit that in this community with that, using the holding tanks, the water, and it's a good step for us. So if the CSD could get back into at least partially funding that, it would be a really good thing. And the other thing that I looked at, the other option was the Whale Rock Reservoir. And whether it's 100 acre feet or 1,000 acre feet or 700 acre feet, both of those options look to me like, with a little tweaking, that they could be pretty good options for this community as well. So there's other things out there that are opportunities for us.